is up, guys? It is time for a little early live before lock. So if you've been upset about not getting proper coverage of the early slates in the last few weeks, have no fear. We are here for you today to go game by game on a 3-game slate. So nothing will be uncovered here. 9 hitters, 8 hitters, doesn't matter. We're going to talk about every single one. And I am Chris Spags, joined by a man who is well equipped for me to fill this hour together. You know him, you love him. He's nerd-ass Greg Ehrenberg. How you doing, Greg?
You're goddamn right. He's well equipped. But here's the other thing also. We've got, all right, so we've got 58 minutes here to talk about 3 games. Any question you ask, there's a very high probability that it is going to get answered because Spags and I have time to kill. So this show, definitely any questions we get, much appreciated. It'll help us fill time. Also make it a little more entertaining where we can engage the audience, which is probably going to be a little bit more entertaining than us just talking about every hitter in every single team's lineup today.
Or just talking more about MLB The Show. We could bring producer Tyler on. We're having a nice conversation beforehand about how our roads to the show careers are going. So lots of directions this can go here. But I think the questions mode that Greg just proposed probably going to be the best one. So drop those questions in the YouTube chat or the premium Slack. And make sure you're also playing along with all of our data at awesemo.com/join. Today, the ownership rankings are a free premium tool, but you can get all the other tools here. The player projections, the ownership projections, the top pitchers tool, the top stacks tool, the lineup builder, lots of different ways to make great lineups for yourself. You can do that all by going to awesemo.com/join. Get a weekly pass for all of our sports for $29.95 or get just an MLB weekly package for $15.95 on there. Either way, lots of options for you guys. And if you even get an express package, you get the access to the premium Slack, which is about as valuable as anything you'll find out there with the news god, news alerts, as well as the guys just chatting in there every day about their favorite plays, how they're trying to approach lineups, all that stuff. So make sure you're going to awesemo.com/join and checking out all of our offerings. And Greg, also, this show's not sponsored today. So do you have anything that you want to promote here? I feel like we might as well take advantage of the fact that a rare non-sponsored show to get into the mix.
Yeah, I'm going to keep pushing the same name and pushing. Go follow at Eric Lindquist on Twitter, the man who's making bets against nobody and painting unibrows on himself. He's shaving his eyebrows and really has no Twitter followers, and it's really a shame because he's clearly sacrificing himself for people who have no interest in following him on Twitter. So go follow him at Eric Lindquist.
Like that's still it somehow ends up an insult. He's got like no Twitter followers at all. Like nobody wants to be there. Great engagement though for Eric. That's the one thing I will say for him. But go follow at Eric Lindquist and make sure you're following at Ehrenberg Dfs and at Chris Spags as well, so you can see whenever we have shows going out. I am always retweeting my links to shows, even if not tweeting a bunch myself. So make sure you're checking both our feeds out as well. And let's get into the slate, Greg. I guess the first thing we should hit on looks like no weather concerns. Anything you're seeing there on that front?
No, and it's a good thing you brought that up. I just assumed there was no weather concerns. I kind of even forgot that was something to check on because how much of a crap show would that be? It's like, hey, we've got 3 games, but 2 of them are going to get rained out. So yeah, just checking now. There's no weather concerns on any of these games. The only thing really of note is that the Mets-Orioles game does have a decent amount of wind blowing in from left center field.
Tony A saying, you doing early slate without a question mark on there. We'll take that as a question. Yes, we are. In fact, this is an early live before lock show, as I said up top. The MLB strategy portion of things will be coming on the MLB deeper dive later today, where I'll be back with Alex and Max to go through the main slate, but we are doing just the early slate on this show. So that is it. Karth saying, one day you guys are going to push Eric too far. I have to say, this is one case where neither Greg nor I pushed Eric. In fact, it is Eric pushing himself to greatness / just happiness, unhappiness in his marital bed, his lady.
So by the way, you unknowingly pushed him to do the eyebrow thing.
I did nothing.
So here's what happened. He wanted to do 1,500 because I've talked to him about this. He set an unreasonable goal to try to get likes. So he's like, hey, if we get 1,500 likes by the end of the tip-off show, I'll shave my other eyebrow. And you said no. The end of the stream with all the shows today. And you can even see if you watch his face kind of drops a little bit. And he's like, oh, okay. And so he just got backed into a corner doing it. He had no intention of actually doing that.
Well, that's life sometimes, I guess. I really didn't feel like it. Like I rewatched it too to see just in case I did something that I felt, because like I feel bad that our boy Eric feels the need to do shock jock radio stunts for himself to get attention, and I certainly I'm willing to play along with it for the sake of getting our likes up, making it a fun day of content for you guys here on the channel. And I felt like he just offered it up on his own, and I don't know, maybe Eric remembers it differently. I would encourage everybody to rewatch that tip-off show from Monday if you really want to get in there, and then watch the one from yesterday too. Just skim through. You don't have to watch the whole thing because obviously the information is not going to be the most relevant now, but just check it out and see if you missed the saga here of Eric and his eyebrows. You can find more on that important matter here. But let's talk about this early slate, Greg, and any overarching thoughts here before we get into it. And I have to say the one thing that jumps out is a slate where you are going to get 70% owned Taiwan Walker is really one that I was not emotionally prepared for to wake up to today. So that's my one overarching thought. But anything else occurring for you here, Greg?
Yeah, the pitching options are really bad. That's actually one of the reasons I kind of prefer Fanduel a little bit to DraftKings, just because, we're really backed in. Obviously we have to play two pitchers on DraftKings, and you kind of have to get exposure to with Taiwan Walker at 8,600 and 70% ownership. I'm underweight to the field on him. The Orioles are a team that I'm stacking pretty heavily on DraftKings just because of that. I don't expect it to go well, but I expect it to go better than what the odds suggest in terms of at least how the field is rostering Taiwan Walker and how often they're stacking the Orioles. But overall, that's one of the reasons also I prefer FanDuel for this particular slate, because I find it really, really difficult to find two starting pitchers that I have any amount of confidence in.
So let's talk about it here, and we'll get to this chalk picture up top because we have Taiwan Walker going against Baltimore, 3.1 implied runs for the Orioles, and Taiwan Walker, as I mentioned, going to be a little bit under 69% owned on DraftKings, it looks like, which normally would be a nice number, not so much when you have no other pitching options. And then on FanDuel, it looks like, of course, the this Chrome update just crashing out because I switched tabs. It's very frustrating. We're back. FanDuel ownership. Not quite as chalky on FanDuel. It looks like it'll be more of a sunny gray slate there, but still 38% ownership going Taiwan Walker's way. Of course, you can always get those ownership projections for yourself at awesemo.com/join. And I'll give you guys the top 5 owned plays coming up here at the halfway point of the show and our little money time. But Taiwan Walker, Greg, has been decent this year to his credit, a 26% K rate, a little bit shy of that. Also only giving up a 167 batting average. So that's probably something that will regress at least a bit closer. He's given up almost a 200 batting average going back to 2019. A little bit more of the sample size going over the last season and change. Walker's been a solid pitcher. Like, I think there's really nothing you could look at for him and go, there's something bad for him. He's getting swing strikes at a decent rate, not as high as some of the stud pitchers you'll normally find on a main slate, but a 10.4% swing strike rate this year, 28% chase rate. I feel like on a normal slate, Greg, Taiwan Walker would be a mediocre middling pitcher, priced in that 7,500 to 9K range. And today he is the stud of the slate, I guess, for the most part. So how are you handling Taiwan Walker, and are you willing to be with the field on a guy who's this chalky?
Yeah, I'm underweight to the field on him. He's definitely in my player pool. And he is my second most rostered starting pitcher for today on both FanDuel and DraftKings behind Sonny Gray. But that's with keeping in mind that Walker is 38% owned on FanDuel right now projected. And then on DraftKings, like you said, right now, 69% is his projected ownership. So even though he's my second most rostered starting pitcher, I'm still underweight to the field on him just by the nature of how the field is getting to him. And on Walker himself, his numbers have been great this year. There's nothing I could really look at and poo-poo on him. Like you said, he is a 2.38 ERA, a 3.94 expected ERA. From a fantasy standpoint, he's looked good too. He's striking out over a hitter per inning. It's just we look at the likelihood of outcomes, and is he really 70% likely to be in the optimal lineup? And to me, the answer is no. Obviously, if you're playing cash games for some reason on a 3-game baseball slate on DraftKings, your pitching options, you're going with Sonny Gray and Taiwan Walker. And even at the top of the show, we had, who was it that asked the question? Somebody had asked, here it is. Scott McDonough asked, Greg, what percentage of your lineups have both Walker and Gray, and why is it 100%? Here's why it's not 100%, because I'm not just building baseball lineups to say this is what I think the best possible construction is for the most fantasy points. Everything in baseball, just the nature of the variance of it, is relative to what I think percentage outcomes are. And there just isn't a situation, unless it's like a DeGrom pitching, where I think somebody is just exceedingly likely to be in the optimal lineup.
Yep, I think that's something. And people talking about the Singer play yesterday being one that was a dud in the YouTube chat as well. And that was what we talked about during the deeper dive yesterday with Alex and Terry, that, sometimes a play when it's just that chalky, it's tough to, really want to be there at the level of confidence. And that's to Greg's point where, the optimal lineup construction in baseball in particular is not always going to be the way it works out optimally. And that's going to be the case probably for this slate too. Obviously, wouldn't be a surprise to see Taiwan Walker and Sonny Gray be the winning combination. But when you do have 4 other guys you can go to at pitcher, there's other constructions that open up different looks. All it takes is one of those different pitchers maybe underperforming relative to those 2 guys, but still opening up the hitters you need to get to. I think that's sort of the main way to look at it here with baseball. And obviously every DFS sport's about the overall picture of your lineup. But with baseball, more than anything, it's the overall picture of your lineup based upon certain contingencies and guys failing or guys underperforming. And you'll see that happen a lot where the Brady Singers of the world, when they're that highly owned, it's just better to get that ownership product down. And like Greg is saying, just find some different ways to get there. So Taiwan Walker, if you want to play him with the field, he'll be 70% owned, but it does seem like worth getting under that is going to be the move. And Greg, one way you can get different with Taiwan Walker is trying to target him, going against him with Baltimore. And these bats for Baltimore, certainly not the best hitting team on the year, only a 143 ISO against right-hand pitching so far this year, 24.3% K rate. That 80 WRC plus means they're about 20% less productive than you'd expect league average to be against a right-handed pitcher. But still, they are a team in this league and a team on this slate, Greg, who is going to have a 12% chance of being a top stack, only 4% ownership expected from Awesemo today. So I think the stack for Baltimore, not the sexiest one, not the most appealing one on a main slate, but for this slate, I think you can make the case to get a good amount of Baltimore Orioles in your lineups.
Yeah, I mean, sexy's relative, right? They're my most stacked team right now, and it's just what I think the numbers lead me to. When we look at Taiwan Walker being 70% owned, the first question we got, like I said in the YouTube chat before, is everybody still, we're just going 100% Taiwan Walker. That's going to be the mindset of a lot of people, and that's going to mean that not that many rosters are going to be stacking the Baltimore Orioles today. Now, if we're just trying to play for the optimal lineup and which team is most likely to score the most runs, no, it isn't the Baltimore Orioles, but we're comparing a team that has, 12% chance to be the top stack of the day and then is only picking up, 3 or 4% ownership. That's something that's really appealing to me on a small slate. I think that in baseball, when I'm looking at these smaller slates, I'm trying to find leverage. And I think that's the easiest way to win a tournament because I'm not looking to build lineups that are going to min cash for baseball. The tournaments pay out top heavy. There's a lot of variance involved. So these are the type of slates I either do really well or absolutely get the shit kicked out of me. And that's going to be the Baltimore Orioles today. And me being a little bit underweight to the field on Taiwan Walker. So I'm definitely going to be pulling for Baltimore today. And if they don't come through, then I'm hoping one of my Taiwan Walker lineups just happens to hit the nuts. Because if not, I'm going to lose today.
Yeah, and you do have a team that gets the extra at bat as well, something that Awesemo talks a lot about, where they are the away team, so they're guaranteed to be getting that extra chance here at some production. And I guess let's talk about the hitters because we do have the time to do that on this show, Greg, where we can dive in a little more about which guys are priorities. And the bottom of the order here, I don't mind getting to a little bit, but where you're getting Maikel Franco at a reasonable price tag, you're getting Rio Ruiz at a pretty cheap price tag. Like I have no issue going to those guys, even though you're not getting much of an ownership discount on the top of the order. But the top of the order clearly seems going to be the benefit or the better part of things here. Cedric Mullins looks solid. I think Austin Hayes, Trey Mancini, and Ryan Mountcastle actually look like decent plays. I think those guys to me would be obviously ones that stand out. All of them under 5% owned besides Mountcastle. Mountcastle will be the highest owned Baltimore Oriole, it looks like, with over 7% ownership expected his way. But Greg, I think the priorities for most people, if they are going to go stacking Baltimore, would be Hayes and Mancini. So would you agree that those guys are the priority bats? And is there anybody else you'd throw into that mix as being one that you definitely want to see more stacks than not?
Yeah, Mullins as well. He's pretty expensive on DraftKings, except he's actually popping up in more of my Orioles stacks than anybody else on the team. The other thing with the individual ownership of these guys, I think they're going to be so low owned as a team that I'm not overly concerned about the individual ownership of everybody. That, and I mean, like, how contrarian could you really get with any individual hitters on a 3-game slate? So to me, just the contrarian stand here is that having any Orioles stacks, and like I said, they're my most stacked team today, that's really going to be the stand I take. In the individual ownership for hitters, not really all that much of a concern for me. And then on Fanduel, the guys who I'm getting the most exposure to, once again, Cedric Mullins on Fanduel, only 3,300, so a little bit cheaper than compared to his DraftKings price. And then Mountcastle is only 2,500 on Fanduel, so close to the min price for Mountcastle. Those are my two favorite Orioles bats on Fanduel.
All right, let's talk about the Mets going against Matt Harvey. Matt Harvey, a revenge game for him, so I'm sure that's going to spur him on to greatness. And to Matt Harvey's credit, he has had some games of competence this year. His home run rate has been down to 2%, though I don't know how long that holds, especially as the weather starts to heat up. This game today, only 63 degrees expected at the time of the game kicking off. But still, Matt Harvey definitely going to give up more power than he's given up this year, I would think. Going back to 2019, has a 4.5% home run rate. And his numbers this year, even though he's gotten some better results, the swinging strike rate for him is actually down to 7.2% from 8.2% going back to 2019. The chase rate for him up a little bit to 28% from 26% going back to 2019. But Greg, you look at Matt Harvey, and I guess we have to ask about playing him because it is a slate where you can play pretty much anybody, and I wouldn't critique it too much, even a Matt Harvey. But are you willing to play any Matt Harvey here on DraftKings? It looks like he'll be around 10% owned. And I just feel like this is a question that has to be asked, even though normally we would certainly not be dying to get much of the former Dark Knight in our lives.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have a very minimal amount of exposure to Matt Harvey. I was actually kind of hoping, because the Mets are really chalky, had Harvey been like 1 or 2% owned, then actually I think he would have been somewhat of a priority for me. But 11%, that's a number that's really hard for me to come over the top of. So, I mean, Matt Harvey, his numbers this year, like you said, I mean, the 3.6 ERA, that's not too bad. The underlying numbers are a little bit worse: 4.4 expected ERA, 3.2, 3.82 FIP, and then the numbers it's really buoyed by, he only has a 283 BABIP this year. So he's definitely been a little bit lucky, but even so, he's pitching, marginally better than he has the last couple of years, where he was just absolutely awful and didn't look like he belonged in the big leagues. At least he's pitching above replacement level so far. So that's a big step up for him. Once again, my stand here is going to be, I don't have that much exposure to Matt Harvey. I'm underweight to the field on him, but I'm way underweight to the field on the Mets, who look like they're going massively overowned on both Fanduel and Draftkings. So I'm just kind of hoping that Matt Harvey gives up a few runs, but the Mets just don't totally obliterate him. And once again, this is a slate that could go one of two directions for me. And I'm taking the most contrarian stands possible today. And we always know how that could go. But for baseball, I like the upside it brings. But I think the Mets are a team to come underweight to the field on.
The one thing that jumps out for me with Matt Harvey is that he's getting barreled at a very low rate this year, on their just actually a little bit under 7% barreled ball rate, which doesn't make the most sense given how Matt Harvey is normally getting hit pretty hard. But the hard contact rate too, also down to 30% from 40%. And it's still something that I think over the longer term sample, especially as it does start to get warmer, I think you're going to see Matt Harvey get hit harder. But I think if you are going to make a case to go against the Mets, or to fade the Mets, rather, whether you're playing Harvey or just not playing the Mets as a stack or playing less of them, I think you can make that case today, just because Harvey's been decent enough so far. And that's sort of the main argument here. And the Mets are going to be very overowned. That's the other part where I like the Mets. I do think you see these hitters, and a lot of guys here hit righties very well. Pete Alonso is a 291 ISO against righties. Dominic Smith is a 246 ISO against righties since 2019. Conforto 242, Lindor 215. Like, I do think these guys all look good, Greg. The issue is that they're all going to be over 30% owned on DraftKings, and even VR are going to be just shy of 30%. And this is a very highly owned stack. And we've talked enough on some slates about how Alex will sometimes just avoid teams on larger slates if they have that much ownership. Some of the Yankee stacks in particular, the last few weeks he's advocated against, and that ended up being the right call. So I guess the question for you, Greg, would be, can you stack the Mets at all without being in a very chalky, uncomfortable ownership situation?
So I have Mets stacks, but they are my least stacked team on the slate, just given what their ownership is. So I am totally inverse of everybody in this game, that in general what the field's doing. The Orioles are my most stacked team. The Mets are my least stacked team. If you look at the overall ownership for the slate, the Mets are the most popular team for the field, or at least that is what they are on FanDuel. I'll bring up DraftKings also, but on FanDuel, the Mets are the most stacked team, and the Orioles are the least stacked team. DraftKings, the Mets are also the most popular team, and the Orioles the least popular team. So yeah, same thing goes for FanDuel and DraftKings. So I'm not totally avoiding the Mets, because I think it's really hard to fade a team entirely when I'm playing 150 lineups on a 3-game slate. But I'm massively underweight to the field on them.
3-run shot saying, mark my words, before the season is over, Mets stacks will bink a slate. I hope you're doing that as a joke, because I will say, mark my words, by the time the season is over, every single team will stack up and win a slate. I think that's normally how MLB goes.
Yeah, maybe not the Milwaukee Brewers, but yeah, no, but in general, like if we're being just totally serious, of course every team's going to win a slate at some point, especially because there's 3-game slates that happen sometimes. So when there's days with 3-game slates, like there's a good chance that it's going to be a 4-4 stack on FanDuel and DraftKings that wins, and then you got a third of the teams just on this one slate are in the optimal lineup.
And Semper Marine saying, and I'm going to try to not be too sarcastic this one. Are you speculating on the ownership, or do you have the actual numbers? So we don't have a crystal ball that can actually sell the future about what every player in the player pools are going to be doing today. So that's one thing to keep in mind here, that we don't have an actual crystal ball. What we do have is the Awesemo ownership projections, which are the best approximation that you'll find in the industry across a bunch of sports. And no discredit to anybody else out there. Obviously, I have the most exposure to the Awesemo's ownership projections and know that stuff. But I'm saying that it is an important part of the equation, that is just knowing where these things are targeted and where they're supposed to go. And NBA in particular talked recently about how it's just impossible to project how the field's going to go, because they sometimes play illogically. For MLB, for the most part, these are going to be as accurate as you're going to find, and on the nose for all that stuff. I don't know what T Wade's being a dick, but T Wade stop being a dick would be the thing I would say. Let's keep going through the rest of the hitters for the Mets though, Greg. Any hitters here, if you are stacking the Mets, if you're a team that's not afraid, or a player that's not afraid of the chalk of this team that we talked about, which Mets would be the priorities for you? Because I think the priorities are all the chalkiest guys. So the field is sharp in that perspective. Going to Lindor, going to Conforto, going to Alonso, even going to Dominic Smith, I think all look like solid plays. But if you go to Kevin Pillar, if you go to Peraza, if you go to Tomas Nido at the bottom of the order, those guys are going to be unowned. So I feel like that's one way to decrease the ownership product is just including one of those guys. But if you want to play the Mets, I know, Greg, you're not, but how would you approach just playing the Mets to try to get that ownership product down?
Yeah, and just to clarify, it's not that I'm not playing the Mets. I'm just way underweight to the field on them. By the way, I'm scrolling through my ownership right now, and it is like sad how underweight to the field I am on a bunch of these. I'm basically every player in the Mets lineup. If any of them goes off and it's 2 home runs, I'm just so dead for the day. The guy I have the most exposure to right now is Michael Conforto. And then everybody else I have like single digit ownership to. So Lindor, VR, Tomas Nido, any catcher I think for this particular slate is going to be in play about evenly. But Conforto is the only one that I have double digit ownership to.
All right, let's talk about the next game here and hit that like button, guys. As you guys know, with MLB content, it is a smaller community right now at this point of year because everybody playing NBA, playing their PGA, playing MMA. MLB is not the only show in town as it is during the summer sometimes. So make sure you're hitting that like button here and watching our Awesemo MLB shows. And of course, subscribing to the channel. Check out all the content, all the analysis that guys like me are going to provide for you, T Wade, out there on the deeper dive coming up as well. We got me coming up with Alex and Max in a couple hours. Talk about the main slate too. So join us then at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern time. The next game up, we got Cincinnati, 4.2 implied runs going against Trevor Cahill. Trevor Cahill, another pitcher, sums up sort of the futility of this slate, a mediocre guy with a 20% K rate this year. Those numbers are exactly in line with where he was going back to 2019, 20% K rate for him there. This year, he's got a 1.6 whip. The XFIP for him has been a little better than I would expect from Trevor Cahill, a 3.6 XFIP. So it does seem like maybe he's playing a little bit better than he has in the last few years with the 4.7 XFIP going back to 2019. But Cahill, Greg, I feel like on the slate, people can play him. He's got a reasonable price tag and the projection's not that bad. Going against Cincinnati in a park that's not as good as their home park. But Trevor Cahill, not normally a player that people would want to roster. And today he'll be rostered at about 40% ownership on Draftkings.
Yeah, so I could say for sure I don't want to roster him, but I am just because I have to roster somebody at the pitcher spot, especially in lineups where I don't have Taiwan Walker. So somebody had asked in the YouTube chat before, let me see if I could find who I'd asked the question. Somebody had asked who my third most rostered starting pitcher was, and I just wanted to give him credit, but I can't find where the question is. But anyway, the answer is Trevor Cahill, and it's not because he's an individually spectacular pitcher. It's because he's cheap, and I think that he's marginally better than the options like Matt Harvey and Zach Davies. So, Trevor Cahill, if you just look at his numbers this year, he's been a little bit unlucky. He's a 6.75 ERA. The underlying number is not nearly as bad. He's a 4.58 expected ERA, 3.58 FIP. Strikeouts haven't really been all that high for him, but he's always been a really high ground ball rate pitcher. And the one thing that's really killing him so far this year is just his batting average on balls in play, 362. But he's always been a guy who for his career has had a lower BABIP, 287 BABIP for his career. So just going to look at his batted ball numbers. His barrel percentage is actually down this year. It was 10.2% last year. It's 6.2% this year. So I just think he's been getting really, really unlucky with some of those batting average and balls in play. By no means is Cahill going to be a stud going forward, but he's going to have an ERA probably closer to the 4.5 range than the current 6 that it's at. So as an SP2, I think it might only take like 12 fantasy points to land up in the optimal lineup today on DraftKings. So with that in mind, Cahill is my third favorite starting pitcher.
Yeah, and I guess the one thing, the one thing going for him, the Cincinnati stack is not over-owned. It looks like we're not appreciably over-owned according to the top stack tool, which is part of the premium offerings we have. And that's another thing for people who are new here. The top stack tool does project the probability of a top stack or a team being a top stack on the day, being the top scoring team on the day compared to the ownership projections. And again, these are projections, so you can sort of doing some degree of guesswork, but it is using algorithms that are designed to be as accurate as possible here. And it does look like a team that's going to have about 21% ownership. And I think that's part of me, the logic going to Cahill here, where I don't know that I want to get 40% Cahill. I think that's still a lot, even on a slate where the pitching is weak. But if you got to 25%, you're going just directly against the stack ownership. And to me, that seems like a pretty safe number to go to. And Greg, I don't know if I know you approach the stuff a little bit differently, but how do you sort of weight that stuff? Because to me, I like to have some logic to the numbers that I'm going to and my exposure counts. And I feel like, to me, just going against the field's ownership of Cincinnati stack is the most logical way to handle Cahill's ownership.
Yeah, I'm a little bit underweight to field on Cahill on DraftKings just because his ownership is so high. On FanDuel, though, let me see. FanDuel, I'm actually overweight to the field on Cahill because he's only 10% owned at a 6,400 price tag. So single pitcher sites, we right now have projected like 85% of the ownership going towards Taiwan Walker and Sonny Gray. So if you roster anybody else at pitcher on FanDuel, you are pretty massively contrarian. If you go with any of those, any pitcher who isn't Walker or Gray, and then you stack the Orioles, you just by default have a lineup construction that nobody else is on. I'm not saying that's my favorite thing in the world, but I do have some lineups that Cahill's the pitcher, the Orioles are the stack, and just nobody else is going to have that combination. And that's somewhat appealing to me on a 3-game slate, especially because that offers a lot of leverage. So for Cahill, I think that, like I said, he's my third favorite starting pitcher overall on the slate, and the Cincinnati Reds is a stack. They look about appropriately owned, so I'm relatively even with the field.
All right, let's talk about the Cincinnati Hitters here. Again, they're going to be pretty highly owned. They also have the highest probability of being a top stack on the slate. So that is sort of the volatility here that goes on in baseball, where obviously it is an event-based sport, and Cahill can fail at the same rate or succeed at the same rate that the Cincinnati stack can be projected to succeed or fail at. In Cincinnati, it does seem, Greg, a lot of ownership here, but they are the top team. And Nick Senzel on DraftKings, again, a situation that has popped up a few times at the Reds where just take Senzel out of the lineup, you're probably decreasing that ownership product quite a bit for the stack. To me, going to Tyler Naquin instead of Senzel, I think is one pivot you can make where you're actually getting a better hitter who's a little more expensive, but I think that's an upgrade there going against Cahill. Gives up a 250 ISO to lefties going back to 2019. So that's one way I would approach Cincinnati here, where you can still get your Winker, still get your Castellanos, still get Mike Moustakas, all guys who are going to be very chalky. But just by replacing Senzel with Naquin, I think you're dropping down the ownership product quite a bit. It'd be the same thing if you went to Kyle Farmer or Tyler Stevenson. So I think the main thing that jumps out to me, Greg, is you can still play Cincinnati and find ways to get lower owned constructions here. And I think that's the way that I'd want to do it, is just really dialing down the Senzel exposure in particular.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to mention here about Tyler Naquin, he's having a really good season so far. He's a 140 WRC plus. So, it's not like there's a real sacrifice there. We're just getting, like you said, a better hitter for much cheaper salary. And what are the real opportunity costs on this slate, right? The pitching options are bad. Most of the offenses are bad. So, I'm just, like I said, I'm generally siding with some of the lower ownership. And Naquin's been a legitimately good hitter this year with a 140 WRC plus. Last year he was terrible, but it's kind of hard to take some of the small samples from last year and put too much weight to them. But 2019 he had a 102 WRC plus, so that was serviceable. So if we just take last year's 63 WRC plus out of the picture, I think that Naquin is a solid hitter.
Yeah, the longer term sample size, I think, looks better for Naquin. And for me, I mostly just omit the single season stuff rather than this current season. But going back to 2019, he has a 200 ISO against righties, 45% hard contact rate. And those are numbers that could play in any park, I think, for the most part. He actually has the highest hard contact rate, a little bit ahead of Jesse Winker, who also has that same lefty split against Cahill that I mentioned. So I think really, to me, going to Naquin is a valuable option. And Stevenson, too, a guy who's hit pretty well in a very limited sample size overall, but has had a 458 on base percentage and 48 at bats against righties so far since 2019. So those are pretty good numbers for Stevenson too. I think really the main thing for me for Cincinnati is just not being afraid to get away from Senzel, because these other guys, you're getting a lot of ownership on Castellanos and Moustakas and all that, and that's fine, but I just wouldn't take the ownership on Senzel. I think is really the main thing I'm going to beat the drum of here. Greg, I guess the one question I would have for you is for Cincinnati, 5-man stacks, 3-man stacks. Do you have any approach here where the whole field is going to be playing? It looks like a lot of 5-man Cincinnati stacks, but again, including Nick Senzel. I'm going to make sure to just say that one more time. Is there one way you'd get different here? Would you be forcing 3-man stacks on a slate of this size, or anything you would do uniquely here just to try to get your construction different on Fantasy Cruncher?
I think making lineups, and by the way, most of my DraftKings lineups are 5-2-1 stacks, and then most of my FanDuel lineups are 4-2 and then 1-1 stacks. But I think the thing you said right there about making 5-man red stacks are going to be different. The easiest way to do it is you just leave Nick Senzel out. or just you pair them with the Orioles. I think those are the two ways to make red stacks that are not the exact same ones that the rest of the field has.
Yep. Okay. That makes some sense. And let's keep going through. We got Sonny Gray on the other side, another popular pitcher today, actually even chalkier than Taiwan Walker will be, though that Gray and Taiwan Walker combination, as Greg talked about earlier in the show, going to be very popular. Branton Cummins in the YouTube chat asking play Cahill and Gray on DK. I'm sure that'll be another popular combination as well. But Sonny Gray does seem to be the clear-cut best pitcher on the slate. He has a 34% K rate this year, actually closer to 34.5% K rate. Going back to 2019, it's a 30% K rate. He's actually had worse power numbers this year, which I would think will regress back to the mean here, especially playing in Pittsburgh. He's had a 2.3% on run rate since 2019, which is under league average. The 3.3% on run rate he's had this year is closer to league average, but he's been getting unlucky on balls in play, 330 BABIP for himself. I feel like Sonny Gray, to me, Greg, is the best pitcher on the slate, and I think deserving of his chalk ownership compared to Taiwan Walker, who has been decent, but not quite as much of a blow-away pitcher as Sonny Gray has been over the last few years.
Yeah, he's so much better than every other pitcher on the slate. I mean, if I had to nitpick at all, the only thing I'd say is that he's only pitched 6+ innings once so far this season. So if you have to say any sort of thing that's negative about Sonny Gray, that would be it. But other than that, he's the best play on the slate. He's overall the best pitching option by a mile. So even though he's really, really popular, I'm overweight to the field on him in both Fanduel and Draftkings. To me, I think that's the easiest way to decrease some of that Taiwan Walker ownership is just by coming overweight to the field on Sonny Gray. I do have some Pirate stacks just for leverage purposes, but once again, it's only because it's a 3-game slate and there's limited options. It's still a very low priority team for me, the Pirates.
Yep. So Sonny Gray, I think going against the Pirates, he's facing 6 guys that strike out above league average, another feather in his cap, in addition to just a Pirates lineup that is not very good overall. This lineup that they have today is going to have a 107 ISO or aggregate ISO amidst them, a 280 on base percentage. So these numbers are even worse than their season long numbers, which are already not good. A 122 ISO for them on the year versus righties, 22.4% K rate. So that's a little bit lower than I would expect them to have today with the pitcher spot and Cahill himself. He's a 60% K rate in a very limited sample size against righties. So I think another easy strikeout should be there as long as he's pitching against Sonny Gray, or is going to be in the game against Sonny Gray. But the hitters for Pittsburgh, Greg, I mean, you mentioned stacking Baltimore going against the chalky Taiwan Walker. Do you see any reason to go to Pittsburgh? Because it does seem, according to the top stacks tool, they have a 9% chance of being a top stack, only 8% ownership. So they are a little bit under-owned, even though it is hard to see a world where they're going to get a really meaningfully positive outcome.
Yeah, my 2 least stacked teams on this slate are the Pirates and the Mets. It's just a factor of, so even though the Pirates, I find it a little weird that, does it surprise you that the Pirates are projected for so much more ownership than the Orioles?
Honestly, yeah, a little bit. I think, I mean, I don't get going against Sonny Gray. He's had some not great results this year, I guess, relative to how he's been the last few, but I think it's because of the value part. I think they're probably coming up in optimizers a lot, and the top stack still does have him having a 45% chance of being the top value stack. And I think people sometimes overemphasize that on short slates, where like a top value stack could be worth its weight in gold on a main slate where you can afford a Garrett Cole or a DeGrom, one of these stud pitchers. On this slate, like, what are you getting the value for to roster Sonny Gray, who you can't even play anyway?
Yeah, that's the thing that's confusing me. Like, are people going to be making Pirate stacks and also rostering Sonny Gray in those lineups? So it's just weird to me. I'm not sure. I mean, now just I'm thinking about it, I'm not sure I totally buy the Pittsburgh's going to double the ownership of the Baltimore Orioles, but I mean, that's currently what we have projected right now, and I've built my lineups around that information. But either way, I mean, right now, just because the Pirates are projecting for at least somewhat of a substantial amount of ownership, it's not a team that I really feel to be overly aggressive with. They're them and the Mets, my 2 least favorite offenses on the slate. I don't think there's all that much upside to stacking against Sonny Gray, and the only reason I have any exposure to them at all is because of the size of the slate, and that I have Sonny Gray in basically every single lineup that isn't a Pirate stack.
Yeah, I think the reason to me to play Pittsburgh would be just to hedge against your Sonny Gray exposure in some amount. And even that, like, I really don't know how they get there. Like when you could play a value team and you have some competent hitters and then they're in an adverse situation going against a tough pitcher, I think that's when I don't mind going to a value team. And I get these guys are very cheap, but like you're getting what you pay for here. If you're playing, Tom in the number 1 spot, a 105 ISO, like you just go through this lineup, their best hitter for power is Gregory Polanco, and he's got a 189 ISO and a 76 WRC plus. And these these are not great numbers for anybody there. I guess you could make the case that Evans is a decent guy getting on base, but not a lot of power to him. There's just not one hitter in Pittsburgh I'd go, this guy is good, and he can get something going against Sonny Gray. Like, maybe they do get something going, but if they do, it's going to be on a very narrow margin of outcomes, because these guys are all like, they're all under 300 hitters. They're all under 300. Like, they just do nothing good.
No, and let's see, what are the team's numbers just for this season? How many teams do you think have a better WRC plus against right-handed pitching this year than the Pirates? Or how many teams are worse? I mean,
how many teams are worse? 2.
Yeah, the Braves surprisingly, and the Detroit Tigers. Those are the only. Oh no, that's against right-handed pitching. Against left-handed pitching,
well, they're going against the righty.
Yeah, I know. I had pulled up against lefties for some reason.
Yeah.
So against right, it's still going to be towards the bottom of the league though. But yeah, so against right-handed pitching, the Pirates have an 89 WRC plus. So the teams that are worse so far this year are the Marlins, the Phillies, the Nationals, the Orioles, the Brewers, and the Rockies.
Okay. Yeah. So that's, definitely not a good hitting team, I think, is the main point to take here. And I think too, they are a team that just occurs a lot in an optimizer. And that's something that we talk about sometimes, where you can pay up to be contrarian, you can do all that stuff. But that's, the inverse is also true. People will pay down to not be contrarian. And that's going to be the case with Pittsburgh. People are going to get them, I think, on their optimizers, and they're probably worth just dialing down that exposure. We're a little bit past halfway point of the show, but we covered the game fully. So let's do some money time, Tyler, if we can, give away top 5 owned plays according to our ownership projections at awesemo.com. Thank you. Boy, I like the little celebratory dance from Tyler too while doing that. really makes me feel like I'm accomplishing something here. Let me refresh to make sure they're as accurate as a recent one here. And again, these are all part of the process. As Greg talked about, like, you're never going to 100% nail ownership projections, because it is still, there's human parts that aren't going to necessarily reflect in the algorithmic process that goes when these are generated. But they're the best way to approach a slate, best way to understand how to attack what the field's going to be doing. So that's the big benefit of ownership projections you can get at awesemo.com/join. But let's talk about the top 5 on DraftKings. Number 1, Sonny Gray, 74%. Number 2, Taiwan Walker, 68.4%. Number 3, Jonathan VR, projected for 47%. Number 4, Nick Senzel, 45%. And number 5, Michael Conforto at 41%. On FanDuel, the top 5 looks like it'll be Jose Ramirez, number 1 at 50%. Number 2, Sonny Gray at 48%. Number 3, Pete Alonso at 45%. Number 4, Francisco Lindor at 43%. And number 5, Michael Conforto at 43%. And I guess that Mets stack on FanDuel, that is tough numbers there. I feel like the Mets stack on FanDuel, arguably more onerous than they are on DraftKings by a pretty wide margin.
I'm so underweight to the Mets on FanDuel. Like, if they happen to go off, I have like 6 bullets or something like that. They're gonna have a chance to hit the nuts, and if it's not one of those, then I'm just gonna get my ass kicked on the slate, because those numbers for a small slate seem egregiously high to me, especially on VR.
Yeah, that's VR in particular. People definitely, obviously the leadoff spot is important because you're getting some more guaranteed at bats and all of that. But I do think sometimes people overrate the leadoff spot by a little bit. And I would say playing VR that heavy, even heavier than the actual good hitters in the Mets lineup. Not that VR is like a bad hitter by any stretch, but he's still not as good as those other guys. He should not be that highly owned, I would say.
He is in 7% of my FanDuel lineups right now.
Yeah, that's a crazy number. I guess let's do the chalk talk segment, Tyler. We normally don't do this on the early show, but I feel like this is one that we can do real fast. Tyler's going to pull it up, so give us a second here. But what we're going to do is just run a quick crunch to see how the lineup construction is going to work. And we're still going to talk about the Cubs in Cleveland, but we have a little benefit of extra time here. So let's do this. Basically, what we're going to do is lock in the 2 chalk pitchers that we think will be in most lineups today, and that was seemingly going to be Taiwan Walker and Sonny Gray. And we're just going to see what stacks come up. And I would think that you're going to get some Pittsburgh in there, but the Mets might fit pretty well. But we're going to see what the chalk construction is going to be, because this is going to tell you guys out there who a lot of the field will be playing along with these chalky pitchers. So if you feel the need to play your Gray and Taiwan Walker combined, at least you can get different there.
So it's not going to get Pittsburgh just because Gray's in the lineup, assuming that we have.
That's right. That's right. My bad. All right, so let's see how we coming, Tyler. Okay, you just this is always the toughest part, where I don't give Tyler enough notice, and then
now he's scrambling to do stuff behind the scenes, and then also we forget that people can't see him. Like, I could see him, so I assume that everybody else could see him also.
Yeah, he usually will. Thankfully, he didn't black out his camera today to do his usual masturbation while we're doing a show. I don't know if it's to us or just in spite of us, but it's definitely. Oh, now he's disappeared entirely on camera. What is that?
Oh my God!
Thumbnail he had.
Is that him or is that okay? Here we go. Now we've got.
All right, so we got the fantasy cruncher up. You can see it now on the screen. Apparently, I'm Ehrenberg Dfs now, and Greg is Eric Lindquist. So a bit of a downgrade for you.
Yeah, it's now look where all my Twitter followers went. Even more reason though, go follow at Eric Lindquist on Twitter. He just upgraded.
So let's run 5-2s, Tyler, just to make sure that it's a little bit less oppressive than it might normally be. And we'll see here. And again, this is definitely how a lot of the field makes their lineups.
Go one more thing, Tyler. Go into advanced options and change, make it so that we could roster max one hitter versus pitcher.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Is that a rule you're making generally for the short slates, Greg?
Yes.
Okay. Good to know. All right, let's see.
Also change, make sure the right slate is picked also.
Yeah, who am I locking?
You are going to lock Taiwan Walker and Sonny Gray.
Okay.
Now, if you're not familiar with what you're seeing right now, this is Fantasy Cruncher, the optimizer that we use the most at Awesemo. Definitely a lot of the pros are using the most. There's other ones you'll find out there, but Fantasy Cruncher is our partner and one that is a partner for a reason here, where they are the one that gets the results the most. And you can see those Mets popping up quite a bit. The Reds hitters also. So, and I guess a little bit of Cleveland, though not quite as much Cleveland. So the Mets popping up everywhere today.
Yeah, it is. Like I said, if the Mets go off against Matt Harvey, which by the way is if we're being honest, probably the most likely outcome of the day. If that does happen, then it'll be a bad day for me. But those are the stands that I'm willing to take with MLB DFS.
And you still got some Pittsburgh down there too. So I think they're popping up as one-offs, I guess.
Yeah, because we changed the setting to allow for one hitter.
Yeah, so that's honestly, I wouldn't I get taking a Pittsburgh one off against Sonny Gray. I would also not mind just not getting a Pittsburgh one off against Sonny Gray either. Like, I feel like if that's construction people are going to do, I don't think I want to be there either.
Yeah, no, that's like I said, I don't have very much interest in the Pirates because I think they're a bad option. I don't have much interest in the Mets because I think they're wildly overowned.
So there you go. So now you are seeing what people will be pulling likely on Fantasy Cruncher. That Jonathan VR number 95% coming up in the 20 lineup run. Just be prepared to see that pop up a lot in your fields tournaments today because that's what people will be doing. They just take them from Fantasy Cruncher. They don't do that extra level of thought. And that's where you guys can find an edge for yourself using the ownership projections and just basic logic to figure out who the chalk pitchers are going to be and then see what that construction looks like. And that is what it looks like for a lot of people today. Let's keep talking through this, Greg. And we got one more game here, a couple more pitchers to hit on. So hit that like button, guys. We appreciate it a bunch. Got Sam Hentges going against the Cubs, 3.9 implied runs for the Cubs. And Hentges, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it's Hentges, right? Or Hentges? It's got to be Hentges.
Yeah, I don't know. I looked at that and I was also at a loss for how to like even the players whose names that I've heard before, I still don't always get the names right. But it's Hentges. Hentges. I mean, like who spells the name like that? I think he's spelled it wrong. Hentges.
It's not a great name. I mean, honestly, not a great pitcher, not a great name. And the pitching results for him this year is faced 42 batters. Honestly, I don't even get this price tag for him. He must be somebody who came in with some degree of pedigree in the prospect list. I don't know. I didn't look it up before the show, but Hentges has given up a 9.5% on run rate, at 350 batting average, is at a 19% K rate for himself. Good velocity on the fastball, I guess, is the one thing you could say for him. That's a positive 95.4 miles per hour on the fastball. But still for him, there's been nothing he's shown so far as a pro, Greg, that I think gives you hopes that he's going to be better, but it's only been 42 batters. So would you play any Sam Hentges for yourself on a slate where he will be unknown, but is a guy that's only pitched about 2 innings per start so far this year?
Well, he hasn't made a start this year. He's been a bullpen pitcher.
2 innings per appearance, excuse me. Yeah.
So that's something else that I don't know how deep is he going to be allowed to work into the game? That's a concern for me. Talking about his acumen as a prospect, the last time we saw him with minor league numbers, 2019, he had a 5.11 ERA in Double-A. And then if you look at the prospect list on Fangraphs, he's unranked. He's the no overall rank, and he's the 13th ranked prospect in the Indians organization. So I mean, he just looks like an organizational guy, and I don't think he's a legitimate big leaguer. If you look at the Zips projection for him this year, which I kind of use as a baseline, was just like, let's see what Zips says about these guys going forward. They haven't projected for a 6.12 ERA for the season. So to me, I don't think it's likely this guy is any good. Once again, we don't have really any minor league numbers because the last couple of years we don't have access to those because they've been playing those on-site ones. They don't have like the normal minor league system going right now. So To me, I think the Cubs are a fairly high priority team to stack. They're also going a little bit under-owned. So I'm not playing any of Hench's. I don't know how. I doubt he's going to work deep into the game, even if he pitches decently.
Yeah, and it's a good bullpen behind him too. The Cleveland bullpen I have is the best bullpen on the slate so far with the results this year, only giving up a 200 batting average, a 1.14 whip, 3.7 xFIP, and actually getting a 27% K rate. So that's the one downside of going to the Cubs is that if you do, even if they get to Hench's early, you need him to get to him early because if they get to that bullpen, it could be some tough times against them. Pretty good swing strike and chase rate numbers as well for the Cleveland bullpen. So just something to keep in mind with stacking the Cubs. But the Cubs, because of Hench's being not good so far, giving up a 16% barrel ball rate. I'm with you that the Cubs are a stack that's worth getting to. They also look under-owned according to the top stacks tool on DraftKings, and that to me is another good cosign. A lot of the ownership going to Wilson Contreras on DraftKings, which is interesting because you can definitely go some different directions there or include him, and just by stacking more Cubs, you're going to get that ownership product down. So and there's a lot of reasons to go to the Cubs, Greg, besides the fact that it's not a great weather game by any stretch. And a not great run total either, 3.9 implied runs for the Cubs. But on paper, the Cubs to me look as good as anybody on the slate, I guess, besides the Mets.
Yeah. And once again, I agree with you. We're just looking at, total runs, but I think that the Mets and the Cubs are in a pretty comparable situation. The difference being is that the Cubs have far, far less ownership. So that's why a lot of my Mets ownership is instead going to the Cubs on that higher range in terms of kind of a pay up option for offense. So the Cubs, at least on DraftKings, one of the reasons that I'm getting to Wilson Contreras a lot is because what other catchers actually have legitimate hitting upside besides him? So FanDuel, it's less of a priority play because we don't have to roster a catcher. But on DraftKings, even though he's 5,100, still somebody who's in the majority of my lineups a catcher just because I don't think anybody else is really all that likely to produce offense from the position.
Yeah, that's reasonable. And I think to me, Tyler Stevenson's a guy that I view as not being like in terms of the track record, not being comparable in that way, but I think can get similar results today. But I agree, like these two, I would say are the two best catchers on the slate by a good enough margin. And Contreras, yeah, DraftKings, you do have to roster a catcher. It's always tough to me to pay that 5,100 for a catcher, but at least you're getting what you pay for in that spot where he's a guy who has a 262 ISO since 2019 against lefties and certainly gotten good results, 6% home run rate too. Contreras, I think, is one chalk spot you could say, maybe harder to argue than some of the other chalk spots we've talked about. We had a question earlier in the show, Greg, about David Bodie and somebody was interested in him, and Jason Hayward. I think people will probably be curious about under 5% ownership expected his way. Matt Duffy in the leadoff spot, not a great power guy by any stretch, has had a .066 ISO since 2019 against lefties, but I think to me, he's a leadoff guy that's unowned. I wouldn't mind him over Nick Senzel as a leadoff guy, even accounting for the price difference. But I guess the main thing for me, Greg, the Cubs, you could stack in a wide variety of ways here, and there's really no way to be wrong because there's not that owned.
Yeah, and especially it's all relative to the slate also. But yeah, I mean, I think the Cubs got certainly third base, rostering somebody like Matt Duffy instead of Jonathan VR as a one-off. Javi Baez is a shortstop option I like a lot. At first base, Anthony Rizzo is a priority play for me. Like I said, at catcher, I think Wilson Contreras is the best overall catcher option on DraftKings. So just making 5-man stacks of this team, it is one of the offenses that's going under-owned on the slate. And in terms of high-end offenses, the Reds are a little overowned. The Indians, we're going to talk about in a second, they're overowned. The Mets are massively overowned. So the Cubs are the one team that's a legitimately viable offense that doesn't have too much ownership.
We also got a question here about Ildemaro Vargas from Double R in the chat asking about him. And he's had pretty good pop, only has had 93 at bats against a lefty, but has had a 236 ISO, only a 15% K rate and a 6.5% on run rate. So he's another guy too that's going to be unknown. I think especially unknown because I don't think he was in the early projected lineups. So I think going to a guy like Vargas too, like you don't have to because the whole stack is pretty lightly owned, but I think he's got perfectly fine pop and is a guy that's going to be even less owned than the other guys. So that seems like a fine pick to me. I don't know if you have any Ildemaro Vargas thoughts, Greg. I'm sure you've been dying to get them out all day long.
I mean, he's in the double-digit percentage of my lineups, so I have more of him than the field. Actually, if this was a slate that we had stud pitching options, I think I would have gotten to him with a little bit more regularity. It's just like, what do I need to do with his minimum, with his cheap salary? What am I really getting to? So he's only in Cub stacks for me. I'm pretty sure. I'm just going to sort that really quick, but. Yeah, so just in 5-man stacks on DraftKings, he makes sense just to have in his correlation with the other team. But, I mean, it's not like his savings and salary is getting me to something I wouldn't be able to get to otherwise.
I mean, honestly, I would take him over Jock Peterson. Jock Peterson projected for 12% ownership on DraftKings. Like he doesn't hit lefties well at all. And certainly could end up, just either not playing well, getting sad. I think there are a lot of ways Jock can go run bad at the 8-hole. I would take Vargas over him. So I think there's some logic going to Vargas on the slate too. And you're also pivoting from some of the chalk plays if you do play him at that second base hole, where I think Senzel will probably be played a good amount as well. Let's talk about the Cleveland Hitters against Zach Davies. Zach Davies, another crap pitcher on a slate full. He pitches a little bit over 4 innings per appearance. That's a positive thing for Davies, but it was only a 12% K rate this year. Even if you go back to 2019 for him, he's at a 17% K rate. So still well under league average. His main skill set has not given up power. League average home run rate of 2.9% since 2019. This year, just a 2.1% home run rate, though the 6 exit from this year does seem like there's some worse things to come for Zach Davies. Zach Davies, even on the slate, Greg, a guy that I don't see getting more than the field's 6% expected ownership. But do you have any interest at all in Zach Davies on this trash slate for pitching?
Not really. I'm slightly overweight to field to him on Fanduel, but it's because he's only 2% owned. I mean, other than that, I don't have anything positive to say about him. He doesn't generate strikeouts. He gives up a bunch of runs. He's somebody who ideally I wouldn't really roster any of him, except I just need a roster, I guess, somebody he fills out in some lineups. But once again, I mean, he's in a total across Fanduel and Draftkings. He's in like 4% of my lineup. So not somebody that I think is any bit important. And if you're somebody who only plays 1 lineup, 3 lineups, or even 20 lineups, I think easy enough, you could just take Davies out of your player pool.
Yeah, I think Davies on a slate full of unimpressive pitching. I think both the pitchers in this game seem to be the most unimpressive of them all. Cleveland, though, 4.6 implied runs, one of the better totals on the slate going against Davies. I have no issue going to Cleveland other than the high ownership for him. They do look a little bit over-owned according to the top stacks tool. A good amount of the ownership on both sides today going to be going to Jose Ramirez. Eddie Rosario and DraftKings also fairly well represented today with a 34% ownership projection on him. I guess, Greg, really the main obstacle to rostering Cleveland today does seem just the fact that they are going to be so highly owned. It's a good spot. Besides that, I guess, not accounting for the weather being pretty cool day, 53 degrees expected in Cleveland by the time this game goes. I think the Cleveland Hitters look fine. I just feel like the ownership to me would be hard to get above the field on these guys.
Yeah. So one guy, actually, I have a whole bunch of exposure to Jose Ramirez. I understand he's popular, but to me, I just had a lot of extra salary I had to spend up somewhere. So I was getting to a lot of Jose Ramirez, even trying to lower his projection and nerf him a little bit. I still got to him a ton just because I think he's by far the best hitting option on the slate. And I just often found it wasn't worthwhile to be leaving, like $1,500 or $1,000 on the table. So Jose Ramirez is still an individual hitter that I have in a lot of my lineups.
Yeah, I mean, as a one-off, I think he does seem fine. I guess this is a general question for you, Greg, but on a short slate like this, when you see that 40% number on Ramirez, is he automatically somebody that you're downgrading, whether it be on DraftKings or FanDuel, or are you willing to be with the field on him just because he is a quality hitter on a slate and going against a bad pitcher too on a slate where there are not a lot of guys who fit both that criteria?
Yeah, so I downgraded him, and then he still popped up in a bunch of lineups anyway. So I just get to a certain point, too, where it's like, what am I going to do? Am I going to downgrade somebody so heavily that I'm just playing the lineups that aren't good? So I just got to the point where, like, hey, I downgraded him. He's still popping up in about half my lineups. So it is what it is. At that point, I'm fine with Jose Ramirez. I'm not gonna nerf him to the point where I just am then leaving, like $1,500 in the table or something like that, or $2,000, where it's like, hey, I just have Rio Ruiz in a lineup instead of Jose Ramirez. So to me, I still think that he's a good play, even with the ownership, just given that I've tried to downgrade him. He still pops up in a lot of my lineups.
Any of the lower owned guys jumping out to you at all? I would throw Rene Rivera as a guy I wouldn't mind playing a catcher on drafting just because you do have to play one, and he has had 176 ISO against righties going back the last few years. So he hasn't played the last few years, but has only faced 18 righties over the last couple seasons, and he's still this year 183 WRC plus. I feel like Rivera, to me, a guy who's going to be a little bit less expensive, and on a catcher slate where there aren't a lot of guys that we have much confidence in, I think just going against Zach Davies is enough confidence for me, along with the limited track record, that I can get to him. But do any other Cleveland hitters jump out as being underowned for what they can do?
No, because all of them are somewhat popular. Like there's no one guy we could look at and be like, oh, this guy's only 8% owned or anything like that. I mean, all of these guys are picking up double-digit ownership outside of Rene Rivera. And to me, the only reason to roster him is really just price point, right? Because if Wilson Contreras has a bad game, there's a chance that all of the catchers on the slate just score like 0 to 3 fantasy points, and then you just win out by having the cheapest guy. So to me, the reason to really roster Rene Rivera is if you need the salary savings and you're not that sold in Contreras having a good game, because individually, I don't really have that much confidence in Rivera either, except it's just kind of a crappy position and he's cheap.
Are you seeing this chat, by the way? Like Larry Berry, I see you got your internet friends to bully me because he called me arrogant and then people said, fuck Larry.
Which, and by the way, it wasn't even that many people. We've got Chris Patrick here saying Spags is the type of guy you want to get in a foxhole with. So kick rocks, Larry. Izzy right here. Great show, guys. Thanks. Best of luck to everybody except Larry. And then Larry says, which here's also your internet friends, but he didn't even mean this as kind of like a slam on you, but that's kind of implying you have two friends on the internet, which is also kind of funny.
Well, I think he's more playing the victim. Like you can't come into a stream where, hey, I'm doing a show. Like I don't know what's arrogant about doing a show. Like trust me, I am the most willing to admit that things can be wrong. I can say things wrong. Greg can say things wrong. Greg especially can say things wrong. I think.
Yeah. But so here's what's going to happen on this slate. If this slate plays out 10 times, I win all of the GPPs like once or something like that, just based on if I'm going just solely based on like some of the numbers in the top stacks. Like I'm going to be very profitable like 1 out of 10 times, and I'm just going to get my ass kicked on the other ones. But that one time that I'm going to be profitable is going to be so much more profitable than the times that I lose out on this kind of slate.
Yeah, no, and I think Greg taking the contrarian approach on these slates, as Greg was talking about earlier, sometimes it's what you have to do to have a chance to just not be, tied with 50, 500 other people, I guess, depending on how chalky of a lineup you're putting out there. But there's very obvious construction. And I guess, Tyler, do you have a sec here to pull up the FanDuel crunch for, let's do that for the guy who asked that too, because that's how not arrogant I am, is that I get a request in the YouTube chat and I go, let's incorporate it into the show because that's how much I care. And shout out Chris too, saying, bro, you two have personally won me my bank. Keep doing you and nothing less. We appreciate that. Chris is supporting Chris's. I love to see, and we just honestly appreciate you guys being here. I know mentioned earlier in the show, but MLB tough sometimes swimming upstream with all the other sports going on. And it can be something here where the community is really what we appreciate here. You guys showing up every day and try to give our best takes possible on a sport that is going to have failure 70% of the time, because that is the joy of baseball. Tyler, how are we looking on that fantasy cruncher?
Yeah, and by the way, also I think Larry did make some valid points.
I will not be Larry. To be clear, I'll never be kind to you now. I'll remember your dumb name, Larry Berry. You sound like a shitty car salesman from the 80s, and I hope you have a terrible day. That's how it lands for me. Who would be the chalk pitcher that you want to lock in on FanDuel, Greg? It should be Sonny Gray.
Sonny Gray, yeah.
So put in Sonny Gray, Tyler, lock him in, and let's see the stacks. You said 4-2s would be better for FanDuel, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so 4-2s. So we'll close it out on this one, see how it looks. And Curse of the Blitz, you guys do a fantastic job explaining your DFS logic. Thank you. I mean, that's really what it's about. We try to explain it the best. You're not always going to be right, especially in baseball, more than any other sport, but it's all about trying to figure out to think about it the right way. And hopefully, over time, like having a process like Greg's, you'll win more over time, is really the main thing. Let's see. I think Larry's just doing a bit, by the way. I think Larry's just a lonely boy doing a bit. So.
Hey, if not, he's... Which also, I kind of get confused, right? Because we do a show on YouTube. There's no point we're holding people hostage to make them watch. But people seem to show up in the YouTube chat and get very upset at us sometimes. Like, you could go, right? We have enough people that like us. There's nobody forcing you to stay and watch us talk about baseball.
Yeah, I agree fully. I don't watch things I don't like. I don't know why you do. I watch the Awesemo shows. I enjoy seeing my friends. I watch other things that I enjoy, but find what makes you happy in life. And Larry Berry, I promise it's never going to be me on a show that because I will go out of my way and I'll just shit talk Larry. He doesn't even have to be at a show. And then in the chat, I'll just be like, and fuck Larry Berry is going to be my intro every show moving forward. Who is the best pitcher for this early slate and why is it Sam Henches? Boy, Josh Shocks, I hope you're right, man, because you are going to be real contrarian. Greg, you thought you were contrarian. That's extra contrarian.
That would be different.
So it does seem like on FanDuel, you're going to, as we talked about, getting a lot of Mets, getting a lot of Cleveland. That's going to be the chalk configuration on there. No surprises. Any final thoughts, Greg? Do you want to give a home run pick just for fun here? I don't know. We got 1 minute left.
I'll say, well, Jose Ramirez, it's not an interesting one. I'll go with Anthony Rizzo.
I will go with, it sucks because the Mets, I think, are objectively too highly owned, but I will say for a home run pick, they look like a great place to go. And I'm going to take Pete Alonso for my home run pick against Matt Harvey.
You chalk donkey.
I am a chalk donkey at that. And much like our pal Eric Lindquist, so you should follow on Twitter at Eric Lindquist. Also follow at Ehrenberg Dfs. Follow at Chris Spags. Follow at Awesemo_com. Anything else you want to plug, Greg, before we call it quits?
No, I'll be doing Live Before Lock later today with somebody, maybe you, maybe Josh, maybe somebody else, but I'll be on Live Before Lock later today.
Yeah, I'll be on the deeper dive coming up for the main slate with Alex and Max coming up at the 12 p.m. Pacific time, 3 p.m. East Coast time. Then you can catch me on the tip off with our friend Eric Lindquist and Kayla Knierim as well. And as I'll close out the show, I always try to do here, where I wish you guys the best of luck, and also fuck Larry Berry. Bye, guys.